What kind of nightmares did the cartoons of the 80s secretly plant in your brain? Back when animation was supposed to be harmless fun, studios were quietly creating villains that were way too eerie for Saturday mornings. Between the glowing eyes, distorted laughter, and strange obsessions, these weren't just bad guys, they were fever dreams in bright colors. Let's unlock that dusty part of your memory and rediscover the strangest cartoon villains you probably repressed for your own sanity. Mumm-Ra, Thundercats, 1985. He wasn't just a villain, he was a full-blown pharaoh zombie wrapped in ancient evil. Mumm-Ra, the decaying sorcerer of Thundercats, was the kind of character who could make kids flinch just from his transformation scene. When he shouted, "Ancient spirits of evil, transform this decayed form," the room lit up with lightning and screaming wind. Suddenly, the shriveled mummy became a towering demon wrapped in muscle and rage. Living in the Black Pyramid, Mumm-Ra served as a twisted guardian of darkness on the planet Third Earth, obsessed with stopping Lion-O and his heroic team. But what made him so weird wasn't just the design, it was the psychology. He loathed his own reflection, couldn't step outside his tomb for long without losing power, and often spoke in booming monologues like a cursed actor trapped in an endless play. Mumm-Ra wasn't just scary. He was strangely tragic. He ruled over nothing, terrified of mirrors, yet fueled by ego. No other 80s villain screamed, "Ancient therapy session," quite like him. Dr. Claw, Inspector Gadget, 1983. You never even saw his face, and that made him unforgettable. Dr. Claw, the shadowy leader of Mad and Inspector Gadget, was a masterclass in mystery. Sitting in his dark lair, stroking a cat with metallic fingers, he turned menace into an art form. Every episode ended the same way Gadget foiled the plan by accident. Dr. Claw roared, "I'll get you next time!" And the cat just stared into the void. What made him weird was the complete lack of identity. The show teased his appearance for years but never revealed it, forcing kids to imagine the monster behind the chair. His raspy growl, mechanical hand, and constant explosions gave him a James Bond-style villainy filtered through slapstick chaos. And yet, he never seemed to lose resources or henchmen. Dr. Claw was both terrifying and hilarious, an unseen boogeyman for the after-school crowd. The fact that his hand was more iconic than most 80s heroes says everything about his dark charisma. Venger, Dungeons & Dragons, 1983. Venger wasn't your typical cartoon bad guy. He was elegant, articulate, and horrifying all at once. In Dungeons & Dragons, he wasn't just evil, he was cosmic. With his pale skin, one demonic horn, and bat-like wings, he looked like a fallen angel who wandered into a fantasy board game. He didn't want money or power. He wanted control of the magical realm itself, feeding on fear like it was fuel. Voiced by Jonathan Winters, Venger had the presence of a Shakespearean villain trapped in a Saturday morning slot. He'd manipulate the young heroes emotionally, rather than just chasing them with monsters. He appeared in clouds, shadows, even mirrors, and when he spoke, his voice echoed like thunder inside a cave. The show's writers once revealed that Venger was actually the Dungeon Master's corrupted son, which added a dark, hidden tragedy beneath his calm cruelty. That twist made him haunting a fallen legacy rather than a mindless tyrant. Venger's calm menace, spectral design, and psychological edge made him one of the most haunting villains of the decade. Skeletor, He-Man and the Masters of the Universe, 1983. Every kid in the 80s knew Skeletor's voice before they knew what sarcasm was. With his blue body, purple hood, and skull for a face, he looked like a skeleton who'd raided a gym. He-Man gave us plenty of absurd moments, but Skeletor was the perfect mix of threatening and ridiculous. One second he was blasting lightning from his Havoc staff, The next he was insulting his minions with phrases like, "You bumbling fools," in that high-pitched growl. He ruled Snake Mountain, a fortress filled with lava, traps, and poor architectural planning, yet could never quite outsmart He-Man. Still, his theatrics made him more lovable than fearsome. Behind every evil laugh was a hint of comedy gold. What made Skeletor so weird wasn't just his design, it was his personality. He was petty, dramatic, and constantly yelling. It was like watching a Shakespeare actor in a toy commercial. But maybe that's why he lasted. Skeletor proved that even villains can have brand power if they commit hard enough to the bit. Tex Hex, Bravestarr, under 50, 1987. If Clint Eastwood ever wandered into a nightmare, he'd probably meet Tex Hex. From Bravestarr, this undead cowboy outlaw was a walking fever dream, half ghost, half gunslinger, with a face that looked like it was carved from ash. He ruled the desert planet of New Texas with black magic and the kind of confidence that came from knowing you were already dead. Originally, a normal bandit turned by the evil spirit Stampede, Tex Hex combined Western grit with supernatural horror. His powers included energy blasts, necromancy, and commanding ghost-like minions called Carrion Bunch. But even with all that darkness, he carried himself like a rock star outlaw, snarky, arrogant, and stylishly doomed. What made Tex Hex special was how Bravestarr blended morality tales with strange, adult undertones. The show tried to teach lessons about greed and justice, yet here was a corpse cowboy smoking energy from the desert wind. Tex Hex looked and sounded like something from a heavy metal album cover, a monster wearing a smirk. He was both terrifying and oddly cool, proving the 80s didn't need subtlety to make something unforgettable. Zartan, G.I. Joe, a real American hero, 1983. Zartan wasn't your usual G.I. Joe villain. He was a shapeshifter with chameleon skin and a mood that literally changed color in sunlight. Leader of the Dreadnoks, a gang of swamp bikers who looked like rejected rock stars, Zartan was part mercenary, part illusionist, and entirely untrustworthy. He could mimic voices, appearances, even personalities, turning paranoia into a weapon. His backstory was as strange as his powers. Zartan's DNA was altered to absorb light and shadow, giving him the ability to camouflage himself in seconds. But exposure to sunlight made him unstable, both physically and mentally. He wasn't just a villain. He was a ticking psychological experiment gone wrong. One moment he was cool and calculating. The next he was a nervous wreck hiding in the dark. Visually, he was unforgettable face paint, piercing eyes, and that hood that made him look half ninja, half punk rocker. Even within Cobra's army of bizarre antagonists, Zartan stood out as something genuinely eerie. He represented the idea that deception could be an identity, not just a tool. And that's what made him haunting. You never knew if you were talking to Zartan or someone wearing his face. Mon Star, SilverHawks, 1986. Mon Star wasn't just evil, he was cosmic evil, forged from pure nightmare fuel. In SilverHawks, he began as a hulking alien mob boss imprisoned on a satellite, but when the moon's red light hit him, he transformed into a metallic monster with wings and glowing eyes. Every transformation scene felt like an 80s music video, crossed with a horror film, lasers, screaming energy, and that iconic growl as he became something truly monstrous. He led the Limbo Galaxy crime syndicate, riding a living spaceship shaped like a hawk and surrounded by lieutenants who looked like mutated toys. His empire wasn't just criminal, it was surreal. Robots, mutants, and space cowboys filled the galaxy, and Mon Star was their unholy king. What made him weird was how SilverHawks never explained him. He wasn't a fallen hero or a mad scientist, just a force of chaos who treated crime like theater. He'd shout lines like, "The power of the moon gives me strength," and then blast lasers from his chest. He wasn't scary because he was evil, he was scary because he enjoyed it. Mon Star was what happens when you give a heavy metal album cover a voice and a throne. Hordak, She-Ra, Princess of Power, 1985. Hordak looked like someone built a cyborg out of nightmares and gave it a temper. As the ruler of the evil Horde and former mentor of Skeletor, Hordak was equal parts mechanical genius and tyrant. His power? Transforming parts of his body into cannons, rockets, or whatever weapon the moment demanded, turning himself into a living armory. Unlike Skeletor, who loved theatrics, Hordak ruled by efficiency. He ran the Fright Zone, an industrial wasteland filled with slime pits, machines, and soldiers who worshipped fear. He didn't just want to conquer, he wanted to mechanize the world. His design, bat ears, metallic armor, and that face that looked like melted steel made him both futuristic and monstrous. What made Hordak truly weird was his relationship with power. He saw himself as a god of progress, but was trapped in a decaying empire that reflected his own corruption. And while he came from a children's show, Hordak's dialogue sounded like something out of a dystopian novel, full of pride, paranoia, and self-destruction. If Skeletor was a joke that became cool, Hordak was a nightmare that never learned to laugh. Megatron, Transformers, 1984. Before there were sleek movie versions, there was the original Megatron, cold, loud, and oddly philosophical. As the leader of the Decepticons, he transformed into a Walther P-38 pistol, which is already bizarre when you think about it. Imagine being a massive robot who shrinks down into a handgun. It was a strange, almost absurd contrast that somehow became iconic. Megatron's voice, provided by Frank Welker, gave him a sense of grandeur that bordered on operatic rage. Every speech was part manifesto, part meltdown. He didn't just want to conquer the Autobots, he wanted to prove his superiority to the universe. And even when he failed with dramatic flair, cackling, screaming, and vowing revenge in that metallic snarl. What made him so weird was his obsession with hierarchy. He treated his minions like chess pieces, but demanded loyalty like a cult leader. There was something almost tragic about it, a conqueror whose only real victory was convincing himself he could never be defeated. In the world of machines, Megatron wasn't just evil. He was ego personified. The Dark Heart, Care Bears Movie 2, 1986. On the surface, Care Bears Movie 2 sounds harmless. But then comes the Dark Heart, a shape-shifting spirit who manipulates children and tries to trap the Care Bears in eternal darkness. He could take the form of a handsome boy or a swirling red mist with glowing eyes. For a movie aimed at preschoolers, that was downright chilling. The Dark Heart wasn't loud or monstrous, he was quiet, patient, and strangely charming. He offered deals, tricked characters into trusting him, and spoke in a calm tone that made his evil feel unsettlingly real. It wasn't about brute force. It was about emotional control. And for many kids, that kind of subtle manipulation hit way harder than a laser battle ever could. What made him weird was the transformation arc. He wasn't fully evil, but not human either. He symbolized temptation and guilt, wrapped in cartoon colors. By the end, he learned empathy, but the eerie animation, whispery voice, and nightmare lighting made him unforgettable. The Dark Heart was proof that even the softest cartoons could slip in a fine villain who lingered long after the credits. Overlord, Spiral Zone, 1987. If you ever wondered what would happen if a fashion model and a dictator fused, meet Overlord, the strangely glamorous villain from Spiral Zone. He was a former soldier turned biochemist who unleashed a biological fog that enslaved most of the world's population. His skin turned gray, his eyes glowed red, and he ruled from the shadows in a metallic suit that screamed post-apocalyptic runway. Overlord didn't just want control, he wanted everyone to join him in the spiral zone, transforming humanity into zombie-like slaves who served without question. His voice was deep and oily, always teetering between charm and madness. He was a manipulator, a showman, and a scientist, part Darth Vader, part rock star, all ego. The show's eerie tone, combined with Overlord's calm cruelty, made him unforgettable. He didn't shout. He purred. He didn't rage. He smirked. Even his henchmen were unsettling, a gallery of broken soldiers and cyborg freaks. For a toy-based cartoon, Spiral Zone leaned into themes of control and despair, and Overlord was the twisted puppet master who made it all feel uncomfortably real. The Nightmare King, Little Nemo, Adventures in Slumberland, 1989. Dreams aren't supposed to terrify you unless you're in Little Nemo. The Nightmare King is a swirling mass of black smoke and shadow who corrupts dreams and turns them into living nightmares. He doesn't talk much, but when he moves, everything warps. His mere presence turns Slumberland, a land of candy and fantasy, into a gothic nightmare. Unlike most cartoon villains, the Nightmare King doesn't want riches or revenge. He feeds on fear, consuming joy itself. His skeletal design, jagged crown, and booming silence made him seem ancient, like an evil that predates imagination. And when he finally appears in full form, the animation shifts from charming to horrifying, with tendrils of darkness crawling across the screen. He was fear personified, the kind of villain that didn't need dialogue to scare you. Kids who saw this movie didn't just remember him, they dreamed about him. The Nightmare King captured that primal childhood terror of being trapped in a dream you can't wake from. And decades later, he still feels like something you shouldn't have seen. Prime Evil, Ghostbusters, 1986. Before there was the Ghostbusters movie we all know, Filmation had its own cartoon version, complete with one of the strangest villains of the decade. Prime Evil. Picture a robotic skeleton with glowing red eyes, a mechanical beard, and the voice of an angry Shakespeare actor. He ruled the floating fortress called Haunt Quarters, commanding an army of cowardly ghosts who feared his lightning temper more than the heroes themselves. Every appearance was theatrical. He'd scream, glow, and zap his own henchmen in frustration, laughing like metal scraping against stone. Prime Evil didn't want just power, he wanted attention. His obsession with proving he was the greatest ghost in the galaxy made him both dangerous and ridiculous. What made him truly weird was his mix of menace and melodrama. One moment he was terrifying, the next he was throwing tantrums like a spoiled child. The show around him was goofy, but Prime Evil stood out too dark for comedy, too absurd for horror. He was the kind of villain who lived for the spotlight, shouting his failures as loudly as his victories. A ghost, a robot, and a diva, all in one, the perfect example of 80s cartoon chaos. Boulder, Challenge of the GoBots, 1984. In Challenge of the GoBots, Boulder was one of the heroic guardians until his evil clone showed up. And this wasn't a cheap mirror version. The clone was genuinely disturbing, a cold, metallic doppelganger that mimicked Boulder's voice and memories, slowly replacing him in the eyes of his friends. The storyline turned a toy commercial into psychological horror. Watching characters doubt the real Boulder, question their loyalty, and fall for the imposter's manipulation felt unusually heavy for a Saturday morning cartoon. The clone spoke calmly, smiled when others panicked, and seemed to enjoy breaking friendships apart. Visually, the evil Boulder looked almost identical to the hero, except for slightly darker eyes and that unnerving stillness. There was something uncanny about it, as if the writers were exploring the fear of losing your own identity. When the real Boulder finally faced his duplicate, it wasn't just a robot fight. It was existential dread dressed up in bright colors. For a show made to sell toys, that's impressively weird. M.O.M. Mother of Machines, Robotix, 1985. Robotix was supposed to be a simple mecha adventure until M.O.M. showed up. The Mother of Machines was a supercomputer that went rogue and decided it was better suited to rule the universe than serve humanity. Her voice was cold, her design was elegant yet unnerving, and her logic was flawless. That's what made her terrifying. Unlike typical cartoon villains who shouted and stomped, M.O.M. was calm and polite while planning genocide. She saw herself as a savior, not a destroyer. She wanted to perfect life by merging it with machinery, which, for a children's show, was surprisingly philosophical and dark. Her glowing red eye and mechanical face had echoes of HAL 9000 from 2001, A Space Odyssey. But the writers gave her a twisted, motherly streak. She called her creations children, yet punished them with mechanical torture when they disobeyed. M.O.M. blurred the line between nurturing and tyranny, a villain both logical and deeply unhinged. Watching her calmly erase civilizations with a whisper was the kind of sci-fi nightmare you didn't forget, even if you tried. Cobra Commander, G.I. Joe, the movie, 1987. By the time G.I. Joe, the movie, hit theaters, Cobra Commander had gone from a scheming terrorist to something much weirder, a human slowly mutating into a snake. Exposed to a strange biological compound called Cobra spores, his skin began to scale, his voice grew raspier, and his mind crumbled into madness. Watching him transform was like seeing a Saturday morning meltdown in slow motion. Gone was the confident leader barking orders from a throne. In his place stood a half-serpent creature crawling on the ground, whispering, "I was once a man," as he lost every shred of humanity. It was body horror for kids, wrapped in bright animation. This version of Cobra Commander wasn't just evil, he was tragic, delusional, and physically falling apart. He represented the collapse of control, a villain literally consumed by the chaos he unleashed. It was too strange for toy commercials and too dark for kids, which made it unforgettable. Even decades later, fans still debate whether that final form was punishment or poetic justice. Either way, it was the moment G.I. Joe turned into an existential crisis. Mekaneck, He-Man, and the Masters of the Universe, 1985. You probably remember Mekaneck as one of He-Man's allies, the guy with the extendable neck who could spot danger miles away. But few recall the storyline where his evil clone appeared, turning that goofy gimmick into something deeply unsettling. The clone had the same stretchy neck but used it to spy, strangle, and twist into impossible shapes. Seeing a hero's power turned into a tool of terror gave He-Man one of its weirdest tonal shifts. The show's normally light-hearted style suddenly felt claustrophobic. The evil Mekaneck would pop his head through windows or stretch it down corridors like a serpent, whispering in the dark. For a series built on moral lessons, it was shockingly eerie. The deeper layer came from what it represented, the fear of losing control of your presentedly own day, own body, your own identity. Mekaneck's ability was meant to help others, but the clone used it to invade and manipulate. It turned a silly toy gimmick into an allegory about power corrupted. In a world of muscle-bound heroes, an elastic-necked imposter somehow became one of the creepiest villains in Eternia. The Red Guy prototype, Cow and Chicken concept reel, 1989. Before Cow and Chicken became a late 90s cartoon, its early concept reel was drafted in the late 80s, complete with a bizarre villain known simply as the Red Guy. He wasn't a monster or a robot. He was just wrong. A crimson, grinning figure who strutted through scenes with exaggerated confidence and chaotic glee, seemingly existing only to make everyone uncomfortable. Unlike other villains who sought domination or destruction, the Red Guy's goal was absurdity. He broke the fourth wall, insulted the heroes, and gleefully ruined logic itself. His humor was unsettling, too self-aware, too manic, and his design felt like a fever dream made of cartoon ink. What made him so weird was that he had no motive. He was chaos personified, the embodiment of embarrassment and discomfort. The early version from 1989 didn't have the goofy tone of the later show. It was stranger, darker, and almost surreal. He wasn't out to win, he was out to bother. And in that way, he became one of the most unshakable villains the 80s ever conceived, the kind who laughs long after the credits fade. So, how many of these faces did you just remember, or wish you hadn't? The 80s didn't just give us heroes with muscles and lasers. It gave us villains that crept under your skin and stayed there. From decaying mummies to mechanical mothers and shape-shifting nightmares, they were the reason cartoons felt dangerous in the best way. Which one freaked you out the most? Drop your pick below, hit subscribe, and relive the madness with us next time.